everybody, welcome back to Touring History X, Y, and Z, where we prove that any date you pick has somehow shaped three generations in completely different ways. I'm Lane.
And I'm out of shape Dave. Today's episode is brought to you by Stew Leonard's, the grocery store that figured out entertainment retail decades before anyone called it experiential marketing. They've got singing animatronic vegetables and a customer service philosophy literally carved into stone.
I know they got that big granite thing out front. What does it say on it, Dave?
The customer's always right.
And that's rule number one. What's rule number two, Dave?
Check rule number
When,
one.
when the customer's wrong, see rule number one. Isn't that
Right,
awesome?
right.
That's right. Plus, they make their own apple cider donuts, fresh
Ooh,
ones
are
in
they good,
shop,
Lane?
which
Wow.
feels like actual magic in our age of industrial food production.
Yeah,
This is fresh stuff.
they pop those out like there's going out of style, and people just gobble them up all year long. So today we're tackling June 30th, and this date is absolutely loaded, my friend. We've got a political purge that redefined authoritarianism, a press freedom case that shaped how Gen X thinks about government transparency, and a movie that taught millennials that horror could be art.
Wow, that's more loaded than a baked potato, Dave. That's for sure. Let's celebrate with some birthdays first, spanning from boxing legends to swimming gods.
That's right. Happy birthday, everybody. June 30th birthday club includes Mike Tyson at 59, edible ears, who taught us that the most dangerous person in any room might also be the most quotable.
Yeah, everybody had the plan until they get punched in the face.
That's right.
Michael Phelps at 40, proving that sometimes the secret to greatness is just being freakishly good and massive.
Shaped like a Vicks cough drop, that one.
Yeah, and then doing it 10,000 times.
Yeah. And, you know, just being a good guy.
Yeah,
Vincent D'Onofrio is 66, the character actor who makes you forget he's not actually a serial killer, detective, or alien in a human suit. Mhm.
yeah. Lizzie Kaplan's 43. She perfected the art of being the smartest person in the room while pretending to be surprised by it.
Yes. Very good. Humble. Stanley Clark at 74, the bass player who proved that the rhythm section doesn't mean background music. Yeah.
Yeah, Nancy DeSalt at 89, Broadway veteran who survived the transition from live theater to television and somehow made it look effortless.
She does. And speaking of things that look effortless, until they very much aren't, dun dun.
Yes. Let's move on to the Night of the Long Knives.
Yes. Ooh.
June 30th, 1934, Hitler begins the Night of the Long Knives, purging SA leadership and political rivals in what was essentially a week long murder spree disguised as government reorganization.
That's right. They took out their own. This is peak Gen X historical trauma because they grew up watching their parents' generation argue about whether something like this could happen in America. And then, well, take a look around, folks.
Yeah, Gen X was raised on it can't happen here optimism, and
Mm-mm.
then spent their adult lives watching democratic norms just dissolve.
Yes. Well, hopefully we'll get things back in order. What makes this so Gen X relevant is that they watched the 2016 election happen and thought, oh, this is how it starts. Not with jackboots per se, but with tweets and rallies. Yeah.
Yeah, you
Now,
know what gets me about Gen X in this event?
what?
Oh, that's a more demure what? I was like, "What, Lane?"
What? What?
They're the generation that had to learn that institutions don't protect themselves. They require constant active maintenance and vigilance by people who care about them. Otherwise, they fall apart.
Yeah. And don't depend on the Supreme Court to straighten things out, right?
Right.
Their parents told them democracy was self sustaining, like some kind of perpetual motion machine. And Gen X had to learn that's not how any of this works. You got to be vigilant.
Yeah, the Night of the Long Knives was Hitler eliminating internal opposition within his own party. Gen X watched that playbook get dusted off in real time.
That's right. You better behave and follow the leader. Otherwise,
Yeah. I'm immune, by the way. I can do whatever I want.
that's right. I had a vaccine. Plus, Gen X grew up during the end of the Cold War thinking authoritarianism was a foreign problem that America had solved, and then had to reckon with the fact that it always is lurking right under the surface.
Yes. Yes. Tell us a little bit more about that theory of democratic backsliding, Dave.
Well, I'm glad you asked, Lane. Look, Gen X learned that the difference between democracy and authoritarianism isn't some massive philosophical gulf. It's a few key people making different choices on a handful of crucial days.
The really Gen X part is they understand how quickly things can flip. One day you have political opposition, the next day you have enemies of the state.
That's right. Don't go to sleep. Sleep with one eye open, Lane. And Gen X watched this lesson play out, not just historically, but in real time, which gave them a very particular kind of political anxiety that other generations don't quite share.
Yeah, they're the generation that knows democracy is fragile because they've seen how easily it bends.
Yes, and they're the generation where everything happens in real time.
Yes, yes, it's always constantly happening.
Yes. So,
Let's
on
move on.
to something that was very interesting that they tried to suppress but couldn't. The Pentagon Papers.
Ooh,
June 30th, 1971, the Supreme Court ruled 6-3 in New York Times Company v. United States that the Pentagon Papers must be published, establishing that prior restraint on the press requires extraordinary justification. You can't just say, I don't want this.
yeah, this is millennial history because they came of age during the golden age of government leaks, WikiLeaks, Snowden, Chelsea Manning, when this ruling became the legal foundation for just about everything.
Pretty much, millennials grew up understanding that their government was lying to them constantly. Really? And the Pentagon Papers ruling was the legal precedent that allowed them to prove it.
What makes this so millennial is that they experience transparency as a moral imperative, not a political choice.
That's right. Think about it. Millennials hit voting age right around 9/11 and spent their entire political awakening watching the government use, oh, national security, folks. Yeah, to justify everything from surveillance to torture. Waterboarding. That's allowed.
Yeah. Yeah. And the Pentagon Papers ruling gave them the legal framework to say, no, actually, we have a right to know what you're doing in our name.
That's right. No cloak and dagger stuff. Millennials also experienced this through the internet, where leaks could be distributed globally and instantly, making government secrecy much harder to maintain.
Yeah. Plus, they watched WikiLeaks drop the Afghanistan war logs, the Iraq war logs, and diplomatic cables, all of which were basically the Pentagon Papers for their generation.
Yeah, there were a lot of logs, sort of like a lumberyard of logs.
You could have a big fire with all those logs.
You know what gets me about millennials in this ruling lane?
What, Dave?
They understood immediately that press freedom and government accountability were linked, but they also saw how easily both could be undermined. Ooh.
Yeah. They watched Chelsea Manning get tortured in prison, saw Snowden have to flee to Russia, and realized that legal protections only work if you have institutional support.
Whatever happened to that guy? Is he still in Russia?
I think he's still in Russia, Dave.
They didn't move him to, like, the border of Ukraine or anything. Here, you better stay here for you. The Pentagon
I don't
Papers.
know.
Well, the Pentagon Papers ruling also happened during peak trust in institutions, and millennials got to watch that trust systematically destroyed by the very revelations the ruling made possible.
Mm,
There's a twist.
yes. Dave has more on his theories about transparency and democracy, don't you,
That's
Dave?
right. It's another twisty. Look here. Millennials learn that democracy requires informed citizens, but they also learn that powerful people will do everything possible to prevent citizens from being informed. Well, it's hard to do these days, I have to say.
Yeah. Really millennial part is that they experienced radical transparency and government secrecy simultaneously. They could read diplomatic cables on WikiLeaks while being surveyed by the NSA.
Served,
Surveilled.
surveilled.
Sorry, not surveyed. Would you like to read this cable? No.
No,
Yes.
I'm trying to map out a farm, okay?
Yeah. Surveilled is the important word there.
And that taught them that information is power, damn it. But having information doesn't automatically translate to having power.
Ah,
Ooh.
that's true. Speaking of power over audiences and terror,
Beep, beep,
June
beep, beep.
30th, 1960, Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho premieres, and suddenly horror movies become psychological rather than just scary.
Yeah, Hitchcock bet the farm on this one, literally mortgaged his house to get this out. And, this is Gen Z because they're the first generation to grow up with horror as a legitimate art form rather than exploitation cinema.
Yeah, Gen Z doesn't remember when horror movies were considered trash. They grew up with Get Out, Hereditary, and Midsummer, horror that wins awards and gets academic analysis.
But what makes Psycho so relevant to Gen Z is that it was the first horror movie to say the real monster might be trauma, mental illness, and societal dysfunction.
Yeah, that's deep. And Gen
Yeah.
Z is the generation that talks openly about therapy, medication, and mental health in ways that would have been unthinkable for previous generations.
Norman? Yes, mother. Psycho also broke all the rules about narrative structure. It kills the protagonist halfway through, makes the
Oh,
audience.
spoiler, Dave. I can't believe you
I
gave it away.
In case you haven't seen it, sorry. Makes the audience sympathize with a murderer, Norman, and suggests that normal looking people can be the most dangerous. Just take me, for instance.
Yeah, that is very Gen Z. They grew up understanding that surface appearance means nothing, that anyone can be struggling with invisible problems, and that normal is often a performance.
That's right. You never know. So beware.
Gotta
Plus,
watch out for the quiet ones and the ones that dress as their dead mother and say, Norman!
yeah, you seem to be walking around in a wig and a knife. It's not normal. Plus, Psycho was one of the first movies to weaponize audience expectations. Hitchcock literally had theater owners lock the doors once the movie started so people couldn't leave or enter. Wow,
Wow. Yeah.
freaky.
Gen Z appreciates that level of artistic control and audience manipulation because they understand that all media is designed to affect your behavior.
You know what gets me about Gen Z and Psycho, though? They're the first generation to grow up knowing that entertainment and psychological manipulation are basically the same thing.
Ah, yeah, you're right. They've been dealing with algorithmic feeds designed to capture their attention since childhood. So they understand media as a form of psychological experimentation.
No pulling the wool over their eyes, eh? Psycho also established the template for twist endings that recontextualize everything you thought you knew, which is basically Gen Z's entire relationship with information.
Plus, Gen Z watch Psycho after growing up with true crime podcasts. So they approach it with this sophisticated understanding of how trauma creates monsters.
The really Gen Z part is that they can appreciate Psycho as both groundbreaking cinema and problematic representation of mental illness simultaneously.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah,
that's deep.
yeah, I know.
They're comfortable holding multiple contradictory ideas about the same piece of media, which is very 21st century skill.
They're the future, Lane. But let's pause for a word from our new sponsor, Stew Leonard's, because they've been creating immersive experiences since before that was a marketing buzzword.
Yes, I can smell the apple cider donuts now, can't you, listener? Seriously, Stew Leonard's figured out that shopping should be entertaining back in 1969. They've got animatronic cows that moo, employees in
Mm.
costume, a petting zoo, all to make grocery shopping feel like visiting a farm.
Plus, their commitment to freshness is genuinely impressive. 80% of everything is made on site while you shop. Your bagels are being boiled, your mozzarella is being pulled, and your apple cider donuts are coming out of the oven at an incredible pace.
Oh, I want one now. And that customer service philosophy, as we said at the beginning, rule number one, the customer is always right. Rule number two, if the customer is ever wrong, reread rule number one. It's carved into a 3-ton granite rock at every entrance of Stu Leonard stores.
In an age of algorithmic recommendations and infinite choice paralysis, Stew Leonard's curates 2,000 carefully selected items instead of overwhelming you with 40,000 options like most stores.
Yeah. Just the good stuff. Who needs
Yeah,
all the rest, right?
that's
Visit
right.
stewleonards.com to find your nearest location and spend $100 and get free ice cream. Sometimes the
Mhm.
best innovation is just treating people well and
Yeah,
free ice cream.
that's right. Now, back to our regularly scheduled historical analysis, hysterical analysis.
Yeah, we're just wrapping things up. There's June 30th through three generational lenses, a political purge that taught Gen X how quickly democracy can collapse, a press freedom ruling that gave millennials the legal framework to demand transparency, and a movie that showed Gen Z how entertainment could be psychological art.
Yes. What's fascinating is how each generation learned to navigate the relationship between power and truth, but through completely different frameworks and lenses.
Yeah, Gen X learned through watching democratic institutions fail in real time. Millennials learned fighting for government transparency in the information age.
And Gen Z learned through understanding that all media is designed to manipulate their psychology. Hey, so they had to develop sophisticated critical thinking skills from childhood.
But they all arrived at similar conclusions about skeptical engagement with authority and the importance of independent information sources.
So, whether it's recognizing authoritarian tactics, we don't imply those ever on this show, demanding press freedom or deconstructing media manipulation, each generation had to become their own fact checkers and democracy defenders. Go for it.
Thanks for joining us on Touring History X, Y, and Z. Remember, Stew Leonard's has been proving that good experiences matter since 1969. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways.
That's right. Ice cream and donuts, folks. Get there. Next week, we're covering July 1st. And spoiler alert, it involves both the invention of something that changed how we think about money and a political scandal that nobody remembers, but everyone should. So stay tuned.
Yeah, until then, question everything, trust your sources, and remember, normal is often just a performance.
That's right. Except here. I'm Dave.
And I'm Normal Lane, as far as you know.
Normal Lane. But we'll both see you next time on
Touring History X, Y, and Z. See you later, everybody.
Bye.